Boardroom. Media.
Some companies fail because they make bad products. Some fail because they run out of money. But a few almost disappear for a far more dangerous reason. They stop believing the world can change. History is filled with giants that once looked invincible. Kodak, Blockbuster, Nokia, BlackBerry. At one point, they all believed they had already won. Then the future arrived. And they weren't ready. But there was one company that stood at the edge of the same cliff, looked down, and somehow found a way back. That company was Microsoft. Today, Microsoft is worth more than $3 trillion. Its software powers businesses across the globe. Its cloud infrastructure supports governments, hospitals, banks, and some of the world's largest companies. Its AI technology is shaping the next generation of computing. But none of this was guaranteed. Because there was a time when experts believed Microsoft had already lost. A time when investors questioned its future, customers laughed at its products, and rivals seemed impossible to catch. So how did a company everyone thought was dying become one of the most valuable businesses in human history? The answer doesn't begin with Windows. It doesn't begin with Azure. And it certainly doesn't begin with artificial intelligence. It begins with two young friends, a magazine, and one opportunity that almost nobody else noticed. Before Microsoft became the company that dominated personal computing, before Windows appeared on millions of computers, before Bill Gates became the richest man in the world, there was something much smaller. A friendship. Bill Gates and Paul Allen had known each other since their teenage years. While their classmates spent afternoons playing sports or watching television, Bill and Paul spent countless hours inside computer laboratories. Computers were rare, expensive, and incredibly slow by today's standards. Yet to them, every machine felt like a glimpse into the future. They weren't simply learning how to use computers. They were trying to understand how computers thought. For Bill Gates, programming wasn't just a hobby. It became an obsession. He could spend entire nights writing code without noticing the sun had already risen. Looking back, it wasn't talent alone that separated them from everyone else. It was curiosity. They believed software would eventually become more valuable than the machines running it. At the time, almost nobody agreed. Most people believed the real money would always come from selling expensive computer hardware. Bill and Paul saw something different. They believed hardware would eventually become common, but software could power every computer ever built. It was an idea that sounded almost ridiculous in the early 1970s. Yet it became the foundation of Microsoft's entire future. Then life pulled them in different directions. Bill Gates enrolled at Harvard University. Paul Allen accepted a job as a programmer in Boston. Although they no longer lived together, they never stopped discussing computers. Almost every conversation eventually returned to the same question: what happens when computers become personal? Nobody knew the answer. Because personal computers didn't really exist. Not yet. Then one winter afternoon, everything changed. Paul Allen was walking through Harvard Square when something caught his attention. A magazine. Its cover featured a strange-looking machine called the Altair 8800. To almost everyone else, it looked like another electronic gadget. To Paul, it looked like history beginning. He immediately bought the magazine and rushed to Bill Gates. Neither of them could stop staring at the cover. The Altair wasn't powerful. It wasn't beautiful. By modern standards, it was almost primitive. But that wasn't the point. For the first time, an ordinary person could actually own a computer. That single realization sent both friends into a frenzy. If millions of people were eventually going to own computers, those computers would need software. Someone had to build it. And whoever built that software could shape the future. At that exact moment, Microsoft still didn't exist. There wasn't even a company. There were only two young programmers looking at a magazine and imagining a future nobody else could see. But having a vision and building a company were two completely different things. The biggest challenge wasn't writing software. It was convincing people they actually needed it. Bill Gates disagreed. He wasn't building software for the world as it existed. He was building software for the world he believed was coming. Without waiting for permission, without having a finished product, they contacted the manufacturer and told them they already had software ready. The truth? They hadn't even written it yet. They worked day and night, barely sleeping, barely eating, until finally they built a working programming language. That gamble worked. And on April 4, 1975, Microsoft was born. At first, it was just a tiny software company. No billion-dollar offices. No famous logo. No global influence. Just two young programmers convinced the future belonged to software. Their first office wasn't impressive. Just a handful of desks, a few computers, and two young founders working longer hours than anyone around them. The pressure was enormous. Every customer mattered. Every contract mattered. One failed project could have ended the company before it truly began. Bill Gates became known for demanding perfection. He believed software wasn't just another business. It would become the language every computer in the world would speak. That belief slowly became Microsoft's culture. The company hired brilliant engineers who shared the same obsession. Long nights became normal. Sleeping under desks wasn't unusual. Coffee replaced rest. Deadlines replaced weekends. Everyone understood they weren't simply writing computer programs. They were trying to build the future. As Microsoft grew, so did Bill Gates' confidence. He began making decisions that many people considered risky, sometimes even reckless. But again and again, those risks paid off. Then in 1980, the opportunity arrived that would change everything. IBM. At the time, IBM wasn't just another technology company. It was technology. When IBM decided to build its own personal computer, the company needed software that could power it. Bill Gates convinced IBM that Microsoft could deliver exactly what it needed. There was only one problem. Microsoft still didn't own the operating system IBM was asking for. Most entrepreneurs would have admitted defeat. Bill Gates didn't. Instead, he quietly purchased an operating system from another developer, improved it, adapted it, and prepared it for IBM's new computer. But the real masterstroke wasn't buying the software. It was what happened during the negotiations. IBM expected ownership. Bill Gates insisted on licensing instead. In reality, it became one of the most profitable decisions in business history. Because Bill Gates wasn't thinking about one computer. He was thinking about every computer that would come after it. Then something incredible happened. Other manufacturers began building computers that were compatible with IBM's machines. Every one of them needed Microsoft's operating system. Hundreds of companies began producing IBM-compatible computers. Every new computer sold generated another licensing fee. Again. And again. And again. It wasn't just a successful deal. It was a machine that printed money. For years, Windows became the operating system of choice across the world. Businesses depended on it. Schools taught it. Families grew up using it. Microsoft became something almost impossible to compete against. By the mid-1990s, the company wasn't simply winning. It was dominating. Money poured in faster than anyone imagined. Bill Gates became the richest man on earth. Microsoft appeared unstoppable. From the outside, it looked like the perfect business. But inside every empire, a dangerous habit slowly begins to grow. Success creates confidence. Confidence creates comfort. And comfort can quietly become complacency. Microsoft had conquered the computer. The question was, could it conquer the future? There's an old saying in business. The company that made you successful is rarely the company that keeps you successful. Microsoft was about to learn that lesson the hard way. But before Microsoft could become complacent, it faced its first serious challenge. And that challenge would come from somewhere unexpected. By the mid-1990s, Microsoft's dominance was beginning to make people uncomfortable. Almost every personal computer in the world ran Windows. But while Microsoft was busy conquering desktop computers, something new was quietly beginning to emerge. The Internet. At first, Bill Gates underestimated it. That assumption would almost become one of the biggest mistakes of his career. Because somewhere else, another company was moving much faster. Its name was Netscape. Within just a few years, Netscape controlled more than 80% of the browser market. Inside Microsoft's headquarters, Bill Gates began asking a dangerous question. If millions of people started using the internet through Netscape, who would really control the future of computing? Windows or the browser sitting on top of Windows? The browser wasn't just another piece of software. It could become the new operating system. In May 1995, Bill Gates sent what would later become one of the most famous internal memos in business history. The Internet Tidal Wave. Microsoft had underestimated the Internet. And if Microsoft failed to lead this new wave, everything they had built could disappear. That memo changed Microsoft overnight. Every department suddenly had one mission: win the Internet. Instead of selling Internet Explorer separately, Microsoft bundled it directly with Windows. Every new computer that shipped with Windows already had Internet Explorer installed. To Microsoft, it was brilliant strategy. To Netscape, it felt like war. Microsoft had turned its greatest strength, Windows, into the weapon that protected its future. But from the outside, many people saw something else. They saw a company using its enormous power to crush a smaller rival before it had a chance to compete fairly. Journalists began asking difficult questions. Government regulators started paying attention. Microsoft's next opponent was the United States government. In 1998, the United States government filed one of the largest antitrust lawsuits in modern business history against Microsoft. The accusation was clear. Microsoft had abused its monopoly over the personal computer market to eliminate competition. The browser wars were no longer a battle between Microsoft and Netscape. They had become a battle between Microsoft and the United States of America. For Bill Gates, the courtroom had become the new battlefield. One of the most important moments came during Bill Gates' videotaped deposition. To the public, he looked defensive. Millions watched one of the world's richest businessmen appear frustrated and uncomfortable under questioning. Then Judge Thomas Penfield Jackson delivered his findings. Microsoft should be split into two separate companies. It was the most dramatic punishment proposed against an American technology company in modern history. For a brief moment, it looked as if the Microsoft empire was about to be dismantled forever. But Microsoft appealed the ruling. The breakup order was thrown out. Microsoft had escaped its most severe punishment. On paper, Microsoft had survived. But inside the company, something had changed forever. For nearly 4 years, Microsoft's leadership had been consumed by investigations and courtroom battles. While executives defended the past, the future kept moving. Google was quietly becoming the gateway to the internet. Apple was reinventing itself under Steve Jobs. The technology industry wasn't waiting for Microsoft to finish its legal fight. It simply moved on. The empire had survived. But survival is not the same thing as leadership. By the end of the decade, Bill Gates began stepping away from Microsoft. In January 2000, he handed the role of CEO to Steve Ballmer. Unlike Bill Gates, Ballmer wasn't a programmer. His greatest strength was building organizations, driving sales, and making impossible goals feel achievable. Inside Microsoft, employees loved him. His energy was legendary. He shouted during company meetings, jumped across stages during presentations, sweated through his shirts while celebrating Microsoft's victories. And for a while, it looked like he was right. Under his leadership, Microsoft made enormous amounts of money. Windows continued dominating. Office became even more essential. Year after year, revenue climbed higher. From a financial perspective, Steve Ballmer wasn't failing. But there was a problem hiding beneath those record profits. Money can hide mistakes. While Microsoft celebrated another profitable year, a completely different kind of company was beginning to emerge. Its leader was Steve Jobs. And Microsoft didn't yet realize how dangerous that would become. When Steve Jobs returned to Apple in 1997, very few people thought he could save the company. Apple was struggling. Compared to Microsoft, Apple looked tiny. Ironically, one of the people who helped keep Apple alive was Bill Gates himself. In 1997, Microsoft invested $150 million into Apple. What nobody inside Microsoft's headquarters realized was that they had just helped save the company that would later become their greatest nightmare. Over the next few years, Steve Jobs quietly rebuilt Apple from the inside out. He simplified the company's products, focused on design, obsessed over customer experience. And in 2001, Apple introduced the iPod. To Microsoft, it looked like another music player. To Steve Jobs, it was an invitation. Millions of customers entered Apple's ecosystem for the very first time. Then January 9, 2007. San Francisco. Steve Jobs walked onto the stage. Today, Apple is going to reinvent the phone. He wasn't introducing 3 separate products. He was introducing one. A phone, an iPod, and an internet communicator. All inside a single device. The audience erupted. But inside Microsoft's headquarters, the reaction was very different. Steve Ballmer laughed. He dismissed the iPhone almost immediately. To Ballmer, typing on glass seemed ridiculous. History would soon decide who understood people better. Within months, millions of iPhones were being sold. The smartphone was no longer a luxury. It was becoming the future of computing. And for the first time in decades, Microsoft wasn't leading the next technological revolution. It was standing on the sidelines watching someone else change the world. The success of the iPhone caught Microsoft off guard. But what happened next caught the entire industry off guard. Google entered the race. In November 2007, Google announced Android. Unlike Apple, Google wasn't trying to build one phone. It was building an operating system that almost any manufacturer could use. Samsung, HTC, Motorola, Sony, LG. Within just a few years, Apple and Google controlled almost the entire smartphone market. Microsoft, the company that had once owned personal computing, was almost invisible. Inside Microsoft's headquarters, executives asked, "How did we miss this?" The company launched Windows Phone. The software looked beautiful. Technology reviewers praised it. But there was one problem. Nobody was buying it. In 2013, Microsoft made one of the biggest bets in its history. It announced the acquisition of Nokia's mobile phone business for more than $7.2 billion. But there was a problem that spreadsheets couldn't solve. Customers had already chosen their winners. The smartphone war wasn't still being fought. It had already been decided. Microsoft had spent billions trying to enter a race that had almost reached the finish line. At the center of this gamble was a man named Stephen Elop. He sent an internal memo that became famous around the world. He compared Nokia to a man standing on a burning oil platform in the middle of the ocean. The platform was on fire. Staying meant certain death. Jumping was terrifying. But it offered at least a chance of survival. The burning platform memo. Nokia had waited too long. Within 2 years, Microsoft was forced to admit the truth. The dream had failed. In 2015, the company wrote off almost the entire value of the Nokia acquisition. More than $7 billion gone. The mobile revolution had already chosen its winners. Microsoft wasn't one of them. For the outside world, this looked like the final chapter. Analysts called Microsoft irrelevant. Journalists described it as a dinosaur. Some investors openly questioned whether the company would ever become innovative again. Few people realized that this devastating failure was quietly preparing Microsoft for its greatest comeback. Because sometimes a company has to lose everything it thought mattered before it discovers what truly matters. And in February 2014, a quiet engineer from Hyderabad, India, walked into Microsoft's headquarters ready to make the hardest decision in the company's history. Not to save Windows. Not to save smartphones. But to save Microsoft itself. Satya Nadella. Unlike Bill Gates, he wasn't famous. Unlike Steve Ballmer, he wasn't loud. He rarely raised his voice. He wasn't the kind of leader who dominated a room through personality. He dominated it through clarity. He understood something many executives refused to admit. Microsoft wasn't losing because its engineers had become less intelligent. It was losing because it had become obsessed with protecting its past. Nadella asked a question almost nobody inside Microsoft wanted to hear. What if Windows is no longer the center of the future? For a company built around Windows, that question sounded almost like betrayal. Yet it was exactly the question Microsoft needed. The future wouldn't belong to one operating system. It would belong to the companies that helped people work no matter what device they used. Microsoft needed to be everywhere. Nadella knew changing products wasn't enough. He had to change the culture. He introduced a simple philosophy. Learn faster. Collaborate more. Never assume you're already the smartest company in the room. He called it a growth mindset. Instead of believing intelligence was fixed, he encouraged employees to remain curious, to experiment, to admit mistakes, to keep learning. Then came the strategy that would redefine the company. Cloud first. Mobile first. Instead of asking, how do we make people buy Windows? Microsoft began asking, how do we help people work on every device they already own? That one shift changed everything. Microsoft Office arrived on iPhones, on iPads, on Android devices, on Macs. Years earlier, Microsoft would never have allowed that. Now customers came first. Companies no longer wanted software they purchased once every 5 years. They wanted services that improved every month. Microsoft responded by transforming Office into a subscription. Microsoft 365, the future wasn't about selling products. It was about building relationships. While many people were still focused on Windows, a much bigger business was quietly taking shape. Azure. Microsoft's cloud platform. Millions of businesses already trusted Microsoft. Azure gave those companies a simple path into the cloud. One by one, banks migrated. Hospitals migrated. Governments migrated. Global corporations migrated. The cloud stopped being Microsoft's backup plan. It became Microsoft's future. But Satya Nadella wasn't interested in winning yesterday's battles. He was already thinking about the next decade. If Microsoft couldn't invent every breakthrough, it would partner with the people who could. In 2016, Microsoft shocked Wall Street again. It acquired LinkedIn for more than $26 billion. Microsoft wasn't buying a social media platform. It was buying relationships. 2 years later, Microsoft bought GitHub, the home of millions of software developers. Critics questioned the decision. Developers feared Microsoft would destroy the platform. But Nadella resisted the temptation to control everything. Instead of changing GitHub, he invested in it. Something remarkable happened. Trust began returning. Developers who once avoided Microsoft started embracing it again. The company that had once been viewed as closed was now becoming one of the biggest supporters of open-source software. Because innovation doesn't happen inside buildings. It happens inside communities. And Nadella understood that before many of his competitors did. Then came artificial intelligence. In 2019, the company invested $1 billion into a relatively unknown research organization called OpenAI. Nadella wasn't investing in what AI was. He was investing in what AI would become. 3 years later, the world got its answer. ChatGPT launched. Within weeks, millions of people were using artificial intelligence for writing, coding, learning, research, and creativity. The entire technology industry entered a race almost overnight. But Microsoft had one enormous advantage. It wasn't reacting. It was already there. Because while everyone else was introducing AI, Microsoft was integrating AI into products that hundreds of millions of people already used every single day. Word, Excel, PowerPoint, Outlook, Windows, GitHub, everything. The company introduced Microsoft Copilot. Suddenly artificial intelligence wasn't a separate application. It became a coworker, an assistant, a productivity partner. Exactly the kind of future Nadella had imagined years earlier. And then history repeated itself. Azure became one of the foundations powering the AI revolution. The same cloud infrastructure Microsoft had quietly built over the previous decade now powered some of the world's most advanced AI systems. Wall Street noticed. Investors noticed. The world noticed. Microsoft's value climbed. $1 trillion. Then 2. Then more than $3 trillion. The company that people once called a dinosaur had become one of the most valuable businesses in human history. Not because it refused to change, but because it finally embraced change before everyone else did. Looking back, Microsoft's story was never really about software. It was about one timeless lesson. Every successful company eventually reaches a moment where yesterday's formula stops working. Some refuse to accept it. Kodak protected film. Blockbuster protected physical stores. Nokia protected old mobile phones. BlackBerry protected keyboards. Microsoft almost made exactly the same mistake. The difference was that eventually it chose reinvention over pride. It accepted short-term pain to secure long-term survival. That's why Microsoft never truly died. Because every time the world changed, it eventually found the courage to change with it. Success isn't about being right forever. It's about being willing to become different before the future forces you to. So the next time someone says Microsoft has always been successful, you'll know the truth. Its greatest achievement wasn't building Windows. It wasn't creating Office. It wasn't even reaching $3 trillion. Its greatest achievement was surviving the moments that should have destroyed it. Because sometimes the greatest business victory is simply refusing to become history. Behind every billion-dollar company, behind every spectacular collapse, and behind every unbelievable comeback, there is always a decision made inside a boardroom. Microsoft survived because one generation of leaders accepted that yesterday's formula wouldn't win tomorrow's game. They let go of the past to build the future. They turned failure into fuel. They transformed a dinosaur into a pioneer. And somewhere right now, another giant is making the same mistake Microsoft once made. The only question is, will they recognize it before it's too late? This is why Microsoft never died.
This was Boardroom Media. We'll see you behind the next boardroom door.